Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, it's no surprise to anyone right now. We're in this really kind of bizarre place. Our political divide is in a really severe condition. Large swaths of the population are in their camps, and never shall they ever speak or engage or have just discussions that just a couple years ago were possible. For instance, I've had several conversations recently, and I've talked about this, where things are going wonderfully, things are going great. There's common ground, there's agreement, there's even laughter and understanding. And the second you get anywhere near something that might possibly be political, it's knives out. There are things we used to agree on, believe it or not, like infrastructure. One of those things we used to believe. There were no Democratic roads or Republican roads, or no Democratic bridges or Republican bridges. There were just roads and bridges. But now we can't get anything done because we might give the other side a win. And the sad reality is when our politicians start looking at things that way, we all lose. And look, it doesn't matter to me who you voted for in the last election. How do we get things done? And that's why I'm excited to have my next guest come on and talk about how do we bring the country back together? How do we unite? And more importantly, how do we get stuff done? That's why I've asked Doug Jones to come talk with us. Doug's the former U.S. Senator from Alabama, also a former U.S. District Attorney, or Attorney General. Doug, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, it's great to be with you. I appreciate the opportunity.
So we're in this moment, and this is kind of where I've started. We're in this moment in our politics where we can't even talk to each other anymore. And I know I've got my conservative friends who go, Joe Biden was going to unite the country, Doug. He hasn't done it. I think it's up to us, though, a little bit to want to be united, don't you think?
No, there's no question about that, Rick. You hit the nail on the head. If you really get behind the scenes, and I've been there in Washington, D.C., there's a lot more that people talk to each other about when you're in the Senate, when you're in the House, than what they do publicly. And clearly, in all candor, I think Washington, D.C. actually is probably more politically cohesive, a little bit more bipartisan than the rest of the country, because the rest of the country just doesn't see it. They don't see what's going on behind the scenes. And out there in the world where you and I are today, we've moved from an areas of agreement where we could all agree to disagree without being disagreeable, to a situation where we had kind of this contemptuous nature. And now it borderlines hate. What I'm seeing out there really is hate-filled rhetoric. And look, it's not just the right, okay? We've got our share in the Democratic Party on the left as well. And we got to move past that. And it's going to be very difficult in the social media world. It's going to be very difficult when the parties seem to want to just go for political power as opposed to getting things done. But I'm the eternal optimist, Rick. You followed me in the Senate. You know I was always there preaching, trying to get people together, trying to work bipartisanship, but also I told people I would laugh when they would say, Doug, we want you to be bipartisan. And I would say, well, look, I always like to reach across the aisle, but sometimes I had to reach inside the aisle. I had to reach inside the Democratic caucus to try to pull people together too, to get some things done. And that's, I think, has been a problem that we've seen in the last few months as well.
Yeah, I know, but I look at this infrastructure bill, and I have friends who were in Congress over the years, and they've always said, in past decades, infrastructure was kind of a yawn vote. Everybody wanted it. Everybody wanted to bring projects home. Why was this so difficult to get, and why is it so difficult for us to get, the investments that we need in the future done? I mean, for me, it's about, I want to get things done, but I'm in this weird spot where we're fighting over things we used to really agree on.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. But now let's go back a little bit and look at some of the history. First of all, we've had for the last 3 presidents wanted to get giant infrastructure bills passed. It couldn't really get done because people kept loading the bill up with things that didn't involve infrastructure. So what happened this year is that you had this members of the Senate, you had 10 or 12 members of the U.S. Senate, equal number of Republicans and Democrats said, we want an infrastructure bill. And they worked very hard, and they stripped down to the basics of real, true infrastructure, the kind of infrastructure that you're talking about, that in the past everybody tended to agree on. And they were able to get that done. We're talking about roads, we're talking about bridges, we're talking about broadband, we're talking about hard infrastructure that is crumbling around the United States these days. But then it shifted over to the House of Representatives. And certain members of the Democratic caucus weren't satisfied with just the hard infrastructure. They wanted what they called the human infrastructure, the Build Back Better plan, and they wanted it to go together. So I really believe, Rick, had the infrastructure bill that passed the Senate with 19 Republican votes, remember that, very important, 19 Republican votes in the Senate. If the House had taken that vote early on, you would have had a lot of Republicans who voted for it. It wouldn't have been overwhelming, it wouldn't have been a majority, but you'd have had more than 12, I think, which is all the ones out of there. But for whatever reason, folks in the Democratic Party started fighting among themselves. They held that vote, and then once they did, it became a political tool. You saw the party fighting among itself. You saw differences between that, the Build Back Better plan, and every time that happens, it gave the other side the political ammunition that they needed to say, we're going to vote against this, we're going to deny. They weren't at that table in those fights. And it was a combination of things. But at the end of the day, I was at the ceremony where the bill was signed by the president the other day. It was an incredible day. It was a glorious day. There were Republicans there. There were people from the organized labor there. There were people, mayors there. This is going to be a really big deal. And the key for me is for Democrats to keep talking about it. This is historic, and they need to be talking about it. And they need to not let Republicans who voted against this bill get away with taking credit for it, just like it happened in Birmingham.
Yep.
Just don't let them get away with it. But it was one of those things that time was not on our side. If we could have just passed that bill instead of trying to tie it with something else, which was either going to get worked out or not anyway, I think you'd have had more support. But the longer these things drag on, the more political it gets, the more partisan it gets, and makes it tougher to get anything done.
No, I agree with you, but even my problem with it is, and I understand some of the factions in the Democratic Party wanting to tie them together, because we probably are not going to address those issues. Because I look at what they wanted to bring back in the Build Back Better plan as kind of redoing some of the things of Johnson's Great Society, having a social safety net once again, so that, you know, people who are at the bottom, and look, I grew up in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland. I remember some of those social programs that made people's lives better that were ripped away. And I'm in favor of, hey, how do we bring some of that back so that there is a softer landing when people fall, and there are ways to help people get a hand up and a way forward.
I am too. And I think that bill is going to pass. I think a version of that bill is going to pass. I think it was always a version of that bill was going to pass, okay? Regardless. And that's the difference. Only that, I think Mark Warner said it, only the Democrats would fight over things that we agree with and hold something hostage. It was
that
just
is so
crazy
true.
in my view to do that, and when we didn't have to. And
Yeah.
I really believe the Build Back Better plan, a version of it, I believe is going to pass. It's not going to do everything that everyone wants, but that's what democracy is sometimes, Rick. It's give and take. It's finding common ground on what you can agree on. The one thing that came through that, and I really fought the media a lot for this, because they never, the media, mainstream media, always played up the divisions in the Democratic Party. And they didn't listen to what people were saying at the end of every interview. It didn't matter who was being interviewed, from the moderate to the left. Everybody was saying, we want to get something done. We want to get something passed for the American people. We've got differences. We want it. And media never played that up. They never talked about it. They just played up the differences. So it just made it worse. But I really am hopeful that we're going to get a Build Back Better bill passed. It may not be in December. It could be a little bit later. But we're going to do something for the American people. This president is committed to it. And overall, the Democratic Party is committed to it.
Yeah, but all we keep hearing, and you're right, there's a media problem. And I say all the time, the Democrats haven't done a good enough job of getting their message out, because they don't have the vehicles to do it like the right has built over the last several decades. because there are good things in there. When you talk to people about what's in there and the jobs that could be created and the opportunities that come out of it, I think then it kind of changes the tune. Because all I keep hearing from the right media is the economy's in the tank, inflation's killing everybody, Joe Biden's a failure. Yet I look at the numbers: 5.5 million jobs created in the last 10 months, the lowest rates of new jobless claims in 50 some years. Things are getting better in the supply chain. There's a lot of positivity out there. Yet you're just, as you've pointed out with our media, it's just not being seen.
Well, and the Democrats, look, Democrats traditionally respond more than they go on the offense. They try it, but they generally respond. And what they're responding to are some of the negative things. They're responding to the overall amount that this might cost. But there's legitimate concerns among a lot of people about the size of the bill and the overall cost. And so when you have a responsive message as opposed to an offensive message, of which you're really taking and talking about the things that you're doing, then you're behind the eight ball. You're letting somebody else define you, and you're trying to play catch up. Democrats have got to do a better job of going on offense and going straight to people where they are, Rick. That's the other thing too. We don't need to be out there talking to folks in organized labor, the rank and file, people in the rural areas, people out there that have questions about Democrats. We don't need to be talking down to them. We don't need to be talking and saying we know better than you. We're going to take care of you. We need to be going where they are and understanding their concerns. And they've got a lot of them.
Yeah.
They're very concerned about the economy. They're concerned about inflation. They're concerned about where their job's going to go. They're concerned about education for their kids on a local level. They're concerned about education for their kids. We need to go there, and we need to talk to them about it and what we're doing, and what we're doing in a positive way, and not just responding to Republicans with all the crazy stuff that's going on out there with what they're saying, which most of which is not even factual.
No, I mean, it's insane, some of the stuff that I see and I get from Republican listeners. And I wish it weren't, because this is new. I mean, in the past, I've been able to at least have conversations. Now it's immediately when you start talking about anything political, the knives are out and people are ready to go at each other like I have never seen in the past.
I agree. Ben Sass, who's a Republican from Nebraska and a friend of mine, I like Ben a lot. He calls it insta-certain. The minute you have something said politically, everybody has an opinion that can't be changed. How we go about trying to change that dialogue, how we go about having dialogues, is a real challenge for us, because so many things, whether it's religion, whether it's education, you name it, everything has a political component to it these days, and people go to their corners. And trying to pull people out of their corners from both the right and the left is going to be very difficult. But I'm going to tell you, we got to do it. Our democracy is at stake if we don't do it. And I'm not just talking about attacks from the right. Those are the most obvious. But our democracy is at stake. And if Democrats don't understand that and try to find that common ground, as opposed to just accusing people of things, we've got to, we're going to have a rough road ahead of us.
No, I'm with you. And one of those places, is in our court system. I mean, we've just come out of two trials, the Rittenhouse trial and the Arbery trial, where, depending on where you were politically is where you thought the verdict should go. And the Rittenhouse trial being one of those, where you had the folks on the left, he's absolutely guilty, he should go to prison forever and ever. And on the far right, he's a hero, and he's done patriotic hero work and should be given the Congressional Gold Medal, which you go, insanity. But yet, this is where I struggle. We've got a right-wing court system and another court system where I don't think anybody at some point is going to go, yeah, we trust the outcomes.
Well, that is a huge problem. There's no question about that. And that starts with the Supreme Court now, which is, despite the individual justices trying to say it's not so, the perception is that our Supreme Court is a political court these days. And when that happens, it really hurts the credibility and faith that people have in all of the courts. And the folks on the right and the left, they were both wrong on the Rittenhouse case. This really was not about a political right or a political left. This was about the law as it existed at the time. It's about the facts that they had at the time. And I think most lawyers who watched that case were not that shocked at the outcome. That kid was in the wrong place. He should have never been there. But at the same time, there were a lot of folks that shouldn't have been there.
Right.
And it was a very difficult situation. People would need to remember that the law more often than not in a criminal case is designed to protect those that are accused of a crime. We don't want to start letting our guard down and start letting prosecutors run amok. They've done it before, but we've got to keep our guard up on protecting people accused of a crime.
Yeah.
So I think both the right and the left were wrong. Quite frankly, Kyle Rittenhouse, if he had any real integrity to him at all, he could really make amends and say, look, I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and I should have never been there. And that, if he would just really talk about that, it would take the wind out of the sails of the far right who think that it's okay to be a vigilante. And it is not okay to be a vigilante, but he would acknowledge that he was wrong, he should not have been there, and urge people to have restraint in any situation like this. Unfortunately, I don't think he will do that because he's getting far too much attention from Donald Trump and everybody else on the right, but he had some opportunities. And when you really look at the evidence, Rick, it's hard to argue with a jury in that case. I think one of the problems in that, and look, let's just be honest. I'm gonna just be really candid about this. Our criminal justice system is only as good as the human beings who make it up.
Yep.
Okay. This is not a system where you just punch in a computer card and there's an outcome after an algorithm. These are run by humans. And so in the first instance, you got to have prosecutors and investigators who are going to do the right thing and follow the law. You've got to have a judge who's going to do the same thing. Then you've got to have a jury who's going to do the same thing. At any point, if that breaks down, there's going to be a problem in the system. And it breaks down often, but overwhelmingly it works pretty well. In this case, I think there were things that could have been done different by just about everybody in that case. I'm not completely sure it would have changed the outcome, though.
No, I'm right there with you. And I got to take a break right here. And I want to pick this up on the other side of the break because I do think it's important, because my view of it was pretty simple. That he went there looking for trouble. He found trouble and then, claimed self-defense. And I want to get your thoughts on the other side. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show here with former Alabama Senator Doug Jones. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So as we were talking about in the last segment, you look at the Rittenhouse trial, and I said from the beginning, not surprised by the outcome. In fact, I expected it. My problem with it all along has been simply this. The kid went to Kenosha looking for trouble, saying that he was going to stop violence, and if he had to use violence by taking that AR-15, he was going to do this. And my problem all along, George Zimmerman case back in the old days forward, is if I go looking for trouble and I find trouble, do I then get to shoot somebody? Is this the new normal? Is this where we're going to be? And here to share some thoughts on where this is, our good friend Senator Doug Jones has stuck around through the break. Doug, thanks for sticking around with us.
Rick, I appreciate it. I don't think it's a new normal, Rick. I really don't. I mean, unfortunately, there was not a crime to be charged Kyle Rittenhouse for looking for trouble. And under the law, anybody, if they're in a situation who is threatened, whether you agree with it or not, if a jury reasonably believes that their life was being threatened, they can use the force necessary to defend themselves and to protect themselves, whether they were there looking for trouble or not. And unfortunately, if that was the case, I mean, that has to be the case, quite frankly. And the only evidence in the Rittenhouse case was really that he was there initially to protect property, Quite frankly, I'm not sure a lot of people bought that, but it was about the only evidence that you could get. It's a difficult case for something like that. But, Rick, we also need to remember that one of the things that we've got to do is not just the Kyle Rittenhouse folks that may come when there is trouble brewing. We need to also try to figure out how to stop trouble from brewing.
No, yeah.
That whole thing in Kenosha got out of hand. It was started as peaceful protest, and we need to allow peaceful protest, but we got to figure out ways to make sure that those protests stay peaceful and they don't get out of hand like that, because it was a bad situation in Kenosha, and there was a lot of things about that really made, I think, to some extent, this jury verdict inevitable.
No, and I agree. There was, in my view, and I said from the beginning, there's no way they're going to find him guilty, because at that moment he was defending himself. My problem is and this just happened the other day to me. A road rage incident where a guy came up to my window screaming threats and obscenities and all kind of stuff, and we were going to start rolling around on the ground. And I ended up pushing him away through the window. But it got me thinking: is this a moment where somebody can I shoot him? If I get out and we start wrestling around, can he shoot me? Is this the world that we're moving towards? And look, I don't want that to be our world, but we're seeing these cases. And I look at the Zimmerman case. He started a fight with the kid beat him up, and I'm afraid for my life. I got to kill him now. I don't want that.
No, I think what you're hitting on, Rick, is a much bigger societal problem. It's not a justice system problem. It's a society problem where you got road rage instances like that happen all the time. And people are okay for somehow threatening people, doing violence, following people. You saw it in the Zimmerman case. I think the Zimmerman case was the absolute travesty. I think that jury, for whatever reason, I completely disagreed with that verdict. And you saw just the opposite in the Ahmaud Arbery case, where they also were, stalking poor Ahmaud Arbery. And fortunately, there was a video that showed they just killed him.
Yeah.
They just stalked him and they killed him. What I worry about is that we as a society are becoming a little bit too complacent when it comes to violence in general.
I agree.
Everybody can get in on the act. That's going to be a harder thing to overcome. And it involves families, it involves faith leaders, it involves schools, and it involves public officials who will denounce any kind of violence, whether it's from the left or the right or whatever. Violence and criminal activity of any kind has to be denounced consistently.
No, you're absolutely right, because some of the responses I've gotten from people are, I can't be a Democrat. They're the party of riots and looting, even though that's not true, but it's what they're being fed.
It's totally not true. I mean, it's stunning that they're allowed that peaceful protest that devolve into some kind of riot. That Democrats or any political party would be responsible for that any more than a political party is responsible for violence, period. It's not the case. And Democrats have consistently denounced that violence and urged prosecutions of all those committing that violence. In fact, there was recently the person that replaced me in the United States Senate had an amendment to a bill to deny municipalities any funds, and if they had defunded the police, and every Democrat voted for it. Every Democrat. Nobody wants to defund the damn police. But we need them. We got to have them. And Democrats have got to do a better job of being for law and order, because we are for law and order.
No, I'm right there with you. Now, you tweeted out recently that white supremacy is the #1 domestic terrorism threat these days and needs to be addressed, regardless of whether it comes from the right or the left. Purely political stunts that have white supremacy as a backdrop have no place in what is already a toxic atmosphere. Now, I've got friends who, when they hear white supremacy, they automatically think them. It's whoever's saying it hates white people, and this is targeted at every white person because we all are, white supremacists. Is that what you mean?
No, of course not. That's silly. That is somebody who has got a little bit of a chip on their shoulder and a little bit concerned about some of the things that they may be saying. That's not what I mean at all. In fact, white people contribute to the diversity of this country as much as anybody else does. It is part of that mosaic that we've got here. What I mean is that there are people in this country who absolutely believe that white Caucasians with European descent need to be set on a pedestal. This country needs to be all white, and they will even take up arms if necessary. It's happened before. I mean, we had a civil war over this. We had Reconstruction was a failure because of the same thing, and we ended up with Jim Crow. So white supremacy is just that, supremacy, and people that will do whatever they can to ensure that. That's not all folks. It's not all Republicans. It's not all white people. It is just those who have this bent. And there is no question. You look at the statistics these days, the criminal statistics, white supremacist violence is on the rise and has been over the last several years. We've seen it time and time again, whether it's hate crimes in racial instances or even religious instances. It's on the rise. And that's what I mean. And people need to understand that it is not an indictment of the white race, but it is just an indictment of those who believe in violence to make sure that they control the country or the world or whatever the hell that they are thinking that they should be able, by birthright and color of their skin, control.
I've said for a long time, the reality is the place that we have to come together is in the workplace, and which is why I'm a firm believer in labor unions. And I've said it a bunch of times on election night 2020. I was on a picket line leading a strike. I was marching with Trump supporters and Greens and you name it. We were there fighting what is the righteous fight. And for me, this is the direction forward, I think. Find that common ground, the things that we agree on, that people should be able to make a reasonable living. People should have health insurance, have retirement security, have dignity in the work that they do. But sadly, I'm looking around and the ability for workers to join and form unions have been almost eviscerated. I look at what's going on at Amazon. We just now find out that because of all of the illegal activity that Amazon did in your state in Bessemer, they're now going to get to run another election. And I don't see that as a real penalty. There should have been a union imposed. They should have been forced to bargain. They should have been forced to do the right thing. But yet now they got another bite at the apple to beat their employees up. I do want to get your thoughts on what's going on there.
Well, first of all, I'm really happy to see that Amazon's going to have another vote. I mean, that's the law. That's the only thing they can do. They can't force employees to unionize in a right-to-work state like Alabama, but they give them another bite at the apple. And I think that by showing really the lengths that Amazon went to deny this vote, I'm hoping that it will help these folks organize and get a little bit better job and get more people out there to vote. I was out there with Reverend Barber and some others in support of those folks. But Rick, I think that it goes beyond right now. Let's just be really honest about this. With organized labor, especially in the South, it goes beyond just the right for a living wage and for good benefits and things like that. There are a lot of cultural issues that organized labor and the members have that I don't think that has always been addressed. And we got to make sure that people know what those are and the fact that we can understand all of those issues. But I am hopeful that with what we're seeing in the Build Back Better plan, what we're seeing in the infrastructure bill, I mean, the infrastructure bill alone is going to do more for organized labor than any piece of legislation probably in the last 30 or 40 years. Yep. It's really amazing. I just hope that we can get not the leadership in organized labor, but the rank and file, the guys out on the line there in Pennsylvania or here in Alabama, the unions that we have here. I hope we get them to understand what's been done for them to help them and their families. And I think it's really important that we support organized labor, because I've always believed, at the end of the day, Rick, there's not a ton of difference between what is organized labor needs and wants and what business wants. They've got to have each other. They've got to, organized labor makes these businesses run and makes them profitable. And businesses need to understand that and recognize that as well. And they can fight over contracts, but at the end of the day, They are together what can run this economy. And the economy is running right now. It's booming right now. And I think we're going to see a rebirth of organized labor because folks are going to them to say, this is what we are trying to do for you.
No, I agree, but I look at I look at Amazon, all of the things they got away with, all of the illegal tactics that they've been doing. That Amazon's not new. They're not Magellan. They haven't discovered anything. This is stuff employers have been doing for decades. I've done organizing. I've come up against all this stuff. It's what this is to me is a highlight of how fractured and broken our labor law is, and why we need major comprehensive labor law reform to return to what the original intent of the NLRA was, which is to encourage unions and encourage people to join and form unions so that they could collectively bargain. In fact, it's what employers wanted then because they wanted industrial peace. I don't want to go through what my grandparents' generation had to do with the kind of stuff going on in the streets because, well, we got more guns now.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree with you about that. I'm going to look at the glass half full here, Rick. I just think that this vote for a new election in Amazon could be an interesting turning point. It's not going to completely turn the ship around, but it's getting people's attention about what's going on. And if we can continue with efforts like this, remember, part of all of this in these labor movements and these union votes these days is making sure that businesses follow the rules and documenting it when they don't. That's exactly what happened in this round of voting. And we'll be right back out there supporting these guys again, and we'll see how it goes. I think the votes are there. If they can just get them out. It's just like any other election, Rick. You got to get your votes out. You got to do your homework.
There you go.
It's just not the voter suppression. That's part of it and can be a big part of it. In the past, it's been a controlling part. But I think we got to do a little bit better job too, and that and a lot of other things in voting around the country.
I'm with you. I did want to bring up another thing in your backyard. Warrior Met Coal, I think 1,100 Warrior Met coal miners have been on strike. I guess it's about 9 months now that they and their families have been on strike. And now you've got the court system, again, back to the courts, weighing heavily on the side of the employer, basically shutting down their ability to picket and their free speech rights by issuing these injunctions that I guess now is going to go all the way till December 5th, probably even longer. What do we do for those folks? And again, I go back to the fractured nature of our law. Where do you see forward there?
Well, I really am hopeful that they can get that resolved. It has gone on a long time, and this company, and this is not something it's a really difficult situation once you get these strikes that go on, and there is an element of violence that has occurred on both sides. Okay, both company and as well as the strikers. There's been an element, and again, that's what we hear about. That's what we see about. What's not getting the publicity, which I think could really help with folks, and I know you're doing it, and I wish we could get others, is that Met Coal has had record profits lately. I mean, they have come out of during this pandemic, and they have really been rocking and rolling. At one point, the United Mine Workers, and by the way, my family's been an old union family for a long time, Rick. My dad initially started out as a steel worker. My grandfather, grandfather was a steel worker. My paternal, my grandfather Jones, was a mining organizer. He was a mine worker organizer back in the 30s and 40s. So I've got a couple of his old pieces of equipment right here in my study. So I am hopeful that if we can get information out about the record profits, because union members, those rank and file members have taken some hits over the years. When their companies needed them to step up and reduce some benefits in order to keep that company afloat, by God, they did it. Yeah. Every time they did it. Now it's time for the company to step up. And I think once you can get that information out better, I think the sympathies of the public will be on side of those strikers. If we just hear about violence, it's not going to be. But once they hear that these companies got record profits and they're not getting the miners back to where they were, much less keeping pace with what we now know as the inflation. Met Coal made a big mistake by not doing this about 6 months ago. With inflation the way it is now, it may cost them a little more.
No, it's something that they absolutely have to get to the to find resolution to. because the things that are going on are not great. I got about 30 seconds left. Going forward, I mean, you look at all of the divides that we have, all of the things that are going on. Are you hopeful for the future? Are you hopeful that our political divides will heal at some point, that we can actually get things done?
I am, Rick. I'm very hopeful. Let me tell you something. This country has gone through divides before. We fought a civil war to keep this to get this union. I mean, we fought a revolutionary war to get this union. We fought a civil war to keep it. We went through Jim Crow. We went through Reconstruction. We've gone through the Civil Rights Movement. We've gone through any number of movements. We've gone through a labor movement for labor rights, civil rights, human rights, and we've had divides before. This is a difficult time, but I'm incredibly hopeful because I think the resilience of the American people are second to none. As Joe Biden always says, never count us out.
There you go.
And I think at the end of the day, people are going to start pulling things together, and
Beautiful.
they're done with all of the separation.
Senator, I appreciate the time. Thanks so much. Great talking with you.
Care.
Alabama Senator Doug Jones. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.